Observer Zenth 4492 stood before the massive viewing screen in the Galactic Council's observation chamber. His four eyes moved independently as he studied the data files floating before him. The chamber hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, and the cool blue light made his gray skin appear almost silver. Another routine assignment, he thought as he absorbed the information. Zenth had been doing this work for over 90 years. He was good at it. Very good. His reports were always accurate, always detailed, and always helped the Council make the right decisions about new species joining their galactic community. The species in question this time was called human. They came from a small blue planet they called Earth, located in what they termed the Sol system. The preliminary data was not impressive. Humans were bipedal, like many species. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venomous bite. Their physical strength was average at best. They lived very short lives compared to most galactic species. Most concerning of all, they seemed to make decisions based on emotions rather than logic. Zenth's superior, Council Administrator Velhak, approached with his usual measured steps. The humans faced their first major conflict, Velhak explained, in the clicking language of their people. The Kethamori horde has decided to test them. We need to know if humans can actually fight, or if they will collapse at the first real challenge. The Kethamori were well known throughout the galaxy. They were brutal, numerous, and followed a simple strategy: overwhelm the enemy with superior numbers until surrender became the only option. They had conquered 12 star systems using this method. Most species either joined the galactic community for protection or became extinct. The Kethamori served as an unofficial test for new species. The battle will take place in the Tau Ceti system, Velhak continued. The humans have established several colonies there. Our intelligence suggests they will attempt to defend these colonies rather than retreat to their home system. This gives us an excellent opportunity to observe their military capabilities. Zenth nodded. It made sense. Humans appeared to form strong emotional attachments to places and people. This would likely cause them to make poor strategic decisions, but it would provide valuable data about their fighting capabilities and psychological breaking points. What are my specific objectives? Zenth asked, already knowing the answer, but following protocol, standard assessment, military technology, tactical doctrine, command structure, and most importantly, how they respond to overwhelming pressure. The Council needs to know if humans will be useful allies or if they represent a liability. Zenth gathered his equipment and prepared for the journey. His observation ship was equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology available. He could observe battles from close range without being detected. His instruments could record everything from energy weapon outputs to individual heartbeats. Most importantly, he could monitor all communications, giving him insight into the decision-making process of the species under observation. The journey to Tau Ceti took 12 days. During this time, Zenth studied everything available about human history and culture. What he found was confusing. Humans seemed to fight constantly, not just against other species, but against each other. Their planet's history was filled with wars, conflicts, and violence. Yet they also showed remarkable creativity, scientific advancement, and something the files called art. Most puzzling were the human concepts of honor, duty, and sacrifice. These seemed to involve deliberately accepting harm or death for abstract concepts or for the benefit of others. From a logical standpoint, this made no sense. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct of any intelligent species, yet humans appeared to regularly ignore this instinct. Zenth arrived in the Tau Ceti system 3 days before the Kethamori fleet was expected. He positioned his ship near a dead moon that provided an excellent view of the primary human colony world, New Haven. The human fleet was already in position, arranged in what appeared to be a defensive formation. The human ships were smaller than he expected. Their technology seemed adequate but not exceptional. Most concerning was their numbers. Intelligence reports indicated the Kethemori would arrive with nearly 400 vessels. The humans had positioned 43 ships. To defend the system, Xanth activated his recording equipment and settled in to wait. Based on historical data, this would likely be over quickly. The humans would realize they were outmatched, attempt a brief resistance to maintain dignity, then surrender or retreat. He had seen this pattern many times before. On the second day, he intercepted a transmission from the human flagship. The voice belonged to Admiral Kate Morrison, the commanding officer of the human fleet. Her tone was calm and professional as she addressed her captains. "The Kethemori will arrive tomorrow," Morrison said. "Intelligence confirms approximately 400 vessels. We are significantly outnumbered, but we are not outmatched. Every ship, every crew member, every Marine knows what we're fighting for. We're not just defending colonies. We're defending families, children, and the future of our species in this galaxy." Xanth found this interesting. Morrison was acknowledging the numerical disadvantage but attempting to maintain morale through emotional appeals. This was consistent with human psychology, though it would likely prove ineffective against reality. Another voice joined the communication channel. "Admiral, this is Captain Ryan Burke of the Defiant. My crew is ready. We've been looking forward to showing these aliens what humans can do." "Captain Burke," Morrison replied, "your orders are to engage the enemy advance scouts and fall back to defensive position Gamma. Do not attempt heroics." Burke's laugh came through clearly. "Admiral, with respect, heroics are what we do best." Xanth made a note about this exchange. The human captain appeared to be displaying overconfidence, possibly as a psychological defense mechanism. This suggested that humans might make reckless decisions under pressure, potentially providing valuable tactical information to their enemies. The third day brought the arrival of the Kethemori horde. Xanth watched through his instruments as the massive fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Kethemori ships were larger, more heavily armed, and far more numerous than the human vessels. The sight would have caused most species to begin immediate retreat preparations. The human response surprised him. Instead of pulling back, the human fleet moved forward to meet the enemy advance. The flagship sent a single transmission on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the Human Defense Fleet. You have entered human territory and threatened human colonies. Turn back now, or face the consequences." The Kethemori response was predictable. A harsh voice replied in broken Galactic, "Standard. Humans surrender now, and death will be quick. Humans fight, and death will be slow. Choose." Morrison's reply came without hesitation. "We choose to fight." Xanth observed the human fleet formations as they prepared for battle. Their tactics appeared sound but unremarkable. What struck him as unusual was something he detected through his instruments. The heart rates, brain activity, and stress hormone levels of the human crews were elevated, but not in patterns suggesting fear or panic. Instead, the readings indicated heightened focus and what his computer identified as anticipation. The first exchange of weapons fire began at maximum range. Kethemori doctrine called for overwhelming firepower to break enemy morale quickly. Their ships opened fire with everything they had, creating a wall of energy beams and projectiles. The human response was immediate and unexpected. Instead of attempting to withdraw or find cover, they accelerated directly into the enemy fire. Their smaller, more maneuverable ships began executing complex attack patterns that Xanth had never seen before. Captain Burke's destroyer, the Defiant, led the charge. As weapons fire erupted around his ship, Burke's voice came over the communication channels. "All ships, this is Burke. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone back home who can't fight. Make every shot count." The human attack was unlike anything in Xanth's experience. They seemed to ignore standard tactical doctrine entirely, making decisions that appeared suicidal but somehow proved effective. The Defiant took massive damage from enemy fire but continued its attack run, targeting the largest Kethmori vessel. As the battle intensified, Zenth began to realize that his initial assessment might have been incorrect. The humans were not fighting like any species he had previously observed. They were not calculating odds or preserving resources for strategic withdrawal. They were fighting as if the outcome of this single battle would determine the fate of their entire species. And perhaps, Zenth thought, as he watched the Defiant score a direct hit on a Kethmori battlecruiser, that was exactly how they saw it. The battle in space above New Haven continued for 18 hours. Zenth watched through his instruments as something impossible happened. The human fleet, outnumbered 10-1, was not retreating. More confusing still, they were not losing. Captain, Burke's destroyer Defiant had been hit so many times that Zenth's computers declared it combat ineffective 6 hours ago. Yet the ship continued fighting. Its main weapons were destroyed, its armor was gone, and life support was failing in half the compartments. Burke should have surrendered or abandoned ship. Instead, he was using his damaged vessel as a battering ram. Defiant to all ships, Burke's voice came over the communication channels. Zenth could hear alarms blaring in the background. We're losing power to main engines, but we still have maneuvering thrusters. Anyone need a big chunk of metal thrown at something important? Admiral Morrison's reply was immediate. Burke, get your crew to the escape pods. You've done enough. Admiral, my crew votes to stay. We can still make a difference. Besides, this old girl isn't ready to quit yet. Zenth made careful notes. The human captain was choosing certain death when rescue was possible. His crew was supporting this decision. By all military logic, this was insane. Yet somehow, Burke's actions were having a significant impact on the battle. The sight of the Defiant continuing to fight despite impossible damage was causing other human ships to fight with increased intensity. Lieutenant Lucy Hayes commanded a squadron of human fighter craft. Zenth had been monitoring her communications as she led attacks against much larger enemy vessels. Her small fighters carried limited weapons and should have been easily destroyed by the Kethmori defensive systems. Phoenix Squadron, this is Hayes. We're down to our last missiles. Target the enemy flagship's reactor ports. If we can't punch through their armor, we'll go through their exhaust vents. Her fighters dove toward the massive Kethmori command ship. Enemy fire filled the space around them. One by one, the small human craft were being destroyed. Hayes lost half her squadron in the first attack run. She should have retreated and regrouped. Instead, she did something that made Zenth question his understanding of warfare itself. Phoenix Squadron, missiles are gone. Switch to ramming speed. We're going to show these aliens what human pilots can do. The remaining fighters, their weapons exhausted, began deliberately crashing into the enemy ship. Not random impacts, but carefully aimed strikes at critical systems. Hayes herself, her fighter heavily damaged and leaking atmosphere, guided her craft directly into the command ship's main reactor port. The explosion that followed destroyed the entire Kethmori flagship and 17 nearby vessels. Zenth watched the aftermath in stunned silence. Hayes and her entire squadron were dead, but their sacrifice had eliminated nearly 40 enemy ships and crippled the Kethmori command structure. By any mathematical analysis, this was an impossible exchange ratio. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Phoenix Squadron has shown us the way. Every sacrifice matters. Every life given means 10 more saved. We fight not because we expect to survive, but because our families, our children, our future depends on what we do here. The pattern continued throughout the battle. Human crews made decisions that violated every principle of military logic, yet achieved results that Zenth's computers labeled as statistically improbable. When the human cruiser Washington lost its main weapons, the crew rigged the ship's reactor to overload and rammed it into a cluster of enemy vessels. When the destroyer Roosevelt ran out of ammunition, they used their ship's fabrication systems to create improvised weapons and continued fighting. Most disturbing to Zenth was what he observed about human casualties. When ships were damaged and crew members injured, the healthy humans did not abandon the wounded to maintain combat effectiveness. Instead, they risked their own lives to rescue their comrades, even when doing so reduced their ability to fight. The human hospital ship Mercy moved through the battlefield, ignoring its own safety to retrieve escape pods and damaged ships. When Kethmori fighters attacked the medical vessel, nearby human warships broke formation to defend it, allowing enemy forces to gain tactical advantages. From a purely military standpoint, this was foolish. The logical choice was to abandon the wounded to preserve fighting strength. Yet Zenth noticed that these seemingly irrational acts of rescue had an unexpected effect on human morale and performance. The knowledge that their comrades would not abandon them seemed to make the humans fight with even greater determination. As the battle progressed, Zenth began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented. The humans were not fighting a war of conquest or expansion. They were not even fighting a war of revenge. They were fighting a war of protection, and this fundamental difference was changing every aspect of their behavior. Captain Burke's voice came over the communications. Again, weaker now, but still determined. Defiant to Morrison, we've lost main power, but we've got one more charge left in our emergency systems. There's a group of Kethmori ships moving toward the civilian evacuation zone. We can intercept them. Burke, you don't have weapons or shields. It's suicide. Admiral, those ships are heading for transports full of families, kids who haven't even learned to walk yet. If stopping them costs us the Defiant and everyone aboard, that's still the best deal we'll ever make. Zenth watched as the crippled destroyer, using only emergency power, positioned itself between the enemy attack force and the fleeing civilian ships. The Defiant's crew knew they were going to die. They had accepted this fact hours ago, yet they continued to fight because something was more important to them than their own survival. The Kethmori concentrated their fire on the lone human destroyer. The Defiant's shields had failed long ago, and its armor was gone. Energy beams and projectiles tore through the ship's hull. Explosions erupted throughout the vessel as systems overloaded and failed. Burke's final transmission was barely audible over the sound of his ship dying around him. This is Captain Ryan Burke of the Earth vessel Defiant. We have engaged the enemy and mission accomplished. The civilians are safe. Tell our families. Tell them we did our duty. The Defiant exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Captain Burke and his entire crew were gone, but the civilian transports had escaped, carrying thousands of non-combatants to safety. Zenth found himself experiencing something he had never felt before while observing warfare. His usual clinical detachment was gone, replaced by what he could only describe as emotional turbulence. The humans' actions defied every rule of military engagement he knew, yet they were achieving their objectives. Battle began to turn in favor of the humans, not because they had superior technology or numbers, but because their willingness to sacrifice themselves for their objectives was having a cumulative effect. Every human ship that died took multiple enemy vessels with it. Every human pilot who chose death over retreat eliminated threats to their non-combatants. The Kethmori, who had built their reputation on overwhelming weaker species through superior numbers, found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more desperate. The humans were not breaking under pressure. They were becoming more determined. Admiral Morrison's fleet was down to 15 functional ships when the Kethmori commander finally realized what was happening. The alien voice came over all frequencies, confusion evident even through the translation software. Humans, why do you not surrender? You cannot win. Your ships are destroyed. Your people die. Why do you continue this madness? Morrison's reply was calm and clear. Because surrender means the death of innocence. Because retreat means abandoning those who cannot defend themselves. Because some things are worth dying for, and protecting our families is one of them. Your logic is flawed. Death serves no purpose. Our death serves the greatest purpose of all. It means our children will live free. The Kethmori fleet began to withdraw. For the first time in their military history, they were retreating from a battle they could still win. The human resistance had been so costly, so determined, and so effective that continuing the fight would result in a victory that felt like defeat. As the enemy ships jumped to hyperspace, Zenth recorded the final human casualties. Of the 43 ships that had defended the system, only 8 remained functional. Thousands of human military personnel had died. By any conventional measure, this should have been considered a devastating defeat. Instead, the humans were celebrating. Their communication channels filled with voices expressing relief, pride, and determination. They had saved their colonies. They had protected their non-combatants. They had proven that humanity would not be easily conquered. Zenth realized that his mission parameters were completely inadequate. He had come to observe human military capabilities, but he had witnessed something far more significant. He had seen a species that transformed warfare itself into an expression of their deepest values. The humans did not fight to destroy their enemies. They fought to preserve what they loved. And that difference, Zenth was beginning to understand, made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 3 days after the space battle, the Kethmori returned with ground forces. Zenth had repositioned his observation ship to monitor the surface of New Haven, where human colonies spread across 3 continents. The alien invaders landed far from the main population centers, but their intent was clear. If they could not defeat the humans in space, they would conquer them on the ground. Colonel Lisa Martinez commanded the human ground forces defending the northern continent. Zenth monitored her communications as she coordinated the defense of 17 settlements scattered across thousands of square kilometers. Her forces were spread thin, but she seemed confident in her strategy. All units, this is Martinez. The enemy has superior numbers and better equipment, but they don't understand human terrain. We're going to show them that every hill, every forest, every city block can become a fortress when defended by people fighting for their homes. The Kethmori ground tactics were similar to their space doctrine. Overwhelming force applied directly to enemy positions until resistance collapsed. Their troops moved in massive formations, supported by heavy armor and artillery. Against most species, this approach was devastatingly effective. The humans responded with something Zenth had never seen before. They disappeared. The large human formations that had been visible on his sensors simply melted away. Instead of massing their forces to meet the enemy advance, the humans scattered into small groups and began attacking from unexpected directions. They used the terrain itself as a weapon, turning familiar landscapes into deadly mazes for the invading forces. Sergeant Danny Ross exemplified this new form of warfare. His squad had been assigned to hold a strategic mountain pass that connected 2 major settlements. When Kethmori forces arrived in overwhelming numbers, Ross did not retreat or call for reinforcements. Instead, he sent his men to safety and remained alone to delay the enemy advance. Zenth watched through his instruments as Ross used explosives to trigger landslides, blocking the pass and trapping enemy vehicles. When the Kethmori sent troops to clear the obstacles, Ross picked them off with precise rifle fire from hidden positions. He moved constantly, never staying in one location long enough to be targeted, but always remaining close enough to threaten the enemy. For 3 days, one human soldier held up an entire Kethmori division. Ross had no support, limited supplies, and was wounded multiple times. Logic dictated that he should surrender or retreat. Instead, he continued fighting because his actions were protecting the evacuation of civilians from the settlements beyond the pass. On the 3rd day, Ross's communications equipment was damaged by enemy fire. His final transmission was brief and matter-of-fact. "Pass is clear of friendlies. They can have it now, but it cost them more than they wanted to pay." The explosion that followed brought down half the mountain. Ross had used his remaining explosives to create a permanent landslide that would block the pass for months. The Keth-Mori division was forced to take a longer route, buying precious time for human defensive preparations. Zenth found Ross's actions incomprehensible. The sergeant had sacrificed his life to achieve a temporary tactical advantage. Yet when other human units learned of his stand, their performance improved dramatically. They began taking similar risks, making similar sacrifices, and achieving similar results. Private Amy Chen presented an even greater puzzle. She was a combat medic assigned to the defense of Settlement Gamma, a small farming community. When the fighting reached the settlement, Chen did something that violated every military principle Zenth understood. She began treating wounded enemy soldiers. "Command, this is Chen. I've got wounded Keth-Mori here who need medical attention, requesting permission to establish a field hospital." Colonel Martinez's reply was immediate. "Chen, those are enemy combatants. Your priority is our people." "Ma'am, they're wounded and they're in pain. That makes them patients first, enemies second." Chen set up her medical station in the center of the contested area, clearly marked with human medical symbols. She treated anyone who was brought to her, regardless of species. Keth-Mori soldiers who had been trying to kill her an hour earlier were now receiving her care and attention. The enemy response to this situation was confusion. Keth-Mori doctrine did not account for treating enemy wounded. Their commanders were uncertain how to respond to a human who was simultaneously fighting against them and saving their soldiers' lives. More importantly, Chen's actions had an unexpected effect on her own forces. Human soldiers began fighting, with increased determination, knowing that if they were wounded, Chen would do everything possible to save them. They also began taking prisoners instead of eliminating wounded enemies because they knew Chen would treat them properly. The psychological impact spread to the Keth-Mori forces as well. Soldiers who had been saved by Chen's medical treatment began to question their understanding of humans. Some refused to fire on clearly marked medical personnel. Others began showing mercy to human prisoners. Corporal Jack Wilson's story illustrated another aspect of human warfare that Zenth struggled to understand. Wilson's squad had been ambushed while escorting civilian refugees to safety. The soldiers were killed, but Wilson survived with severe injuries. He also found himself responsible for 37 refugees, including 12 children. Military doctrine was clear. A wounded soldier should either call for evacuation, or if that was impossible, find the nearest friendly forces. Wilson had radio contact with other human units and could have requested rescue. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He appointed himself the protector of the refugee group and began a 2-week journey through enemy territory to reach safety. Wilson was clearly suffering from what human medical personnel called traumatic stress. He showed symptoms of severe psychological damage from watching his comrades die. Yet he continued to function at peak efficiency when protecting the refugees. Zenth monitored Wilson's progress as he led the group through forests, across rivers, and around enemy patrols. The corporal displayed tactical skills that should have been impossible for someone in his psychological condition. He found food and water, treated minor injuries, and maintained morale among the refugees while avoiding enemy forces. Most remarkably, Wilson began forming emotional bonds with the refugees, particularly the children. He learned their names, told them stories, and promised them that they would reach safety. These emotional connections should have clouded his tactical judgment, but instead, they seemed to sharpen his focus. When enemy scouts finally located the group, Wilson made a decision that exemplified everything Zenth was learning about human warfare. He positioned the refugees in a defensible location and went out alone to confront the pursuing forces. "Kids, I need you to be brave for a little while longer," Wilson told the young refugees. "Uncle Jack is going to make sure the bad guys can't hurt you. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and remember that you're the bravest kids in the galaxy." Wilson engaged a full enemy squad by himself. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in enemy territory. The logical outcome was his death and the capture of the refugees. Instead, Wilson used his knowledge of the local terrain and his psychological understanding of enemy behavior to turn the encounter into a series of small engagements. He eliminated the enemy scouts one by one, using their own communication equipment to misdirect reinforcements. When additional enemy forces arrived, they found their advance team dead and the refugees gone. Wilson had successfully evacuated the group to safety before disappearing back into the wilderness. 3 days later, Wilson appeared at a human forward operating base, carrying 2 wounded Kethemori prisoners and requesting immediate medical attention for them. When questioned about his actions, his explanation was simple. They were hurt and alone. Figured they deserved the same chance we'd want. These individual stories were being repeated across the entire conflict zone. Human soldiers were making decisions based on values rather than tactics, emotions rather than logic, and moral principles rather than military doctrine. Yet their effectiveness was undeniable. The Kethemori ground offensive, which should have overwhelmed the scattered human forces, was bogging down in a series of costly engagements. Every settlement they attacked became a fortress. Every human they killed was replaced by 2 more who fought with increased determination. Every tactical victory they achieved came at a price that made the overall strategy unsustainable. Zenth realized that he was witnessing the emergence of a new form of warfare. The humans were not just fighting for territory or resources, they were fighting for their identity as a species. Every battle was a statement about what they valued, what they were willing to sacrifice, and what they refused to surrender. Colonel Martinez's final report to her superiors summarized the situation. The enemy has superior numbers and equipment, but they don't understand what they're fighting. They think this is a war of conquest. For us, it's a war of survival. Not just physical survival, but survival of everything that makes us human. As long as that's true, we can't lose. The situation on New Haven deteriorated rapidly over the following weeks. The Kethemori had committed their full military strength to the invasion, bringing in reinforcements from 3 other star systems. Human supply lines were cut. Orbital support was eliminated, and their scattered forces were being pushed back toward their final defensive positions. Major Pete Coleman commanded Firebase Alpha, the last significant human stronghold on the northern continent. His position protected the main spaceport where civilian evacuation ships were still launching every few hours. 50,000 non-combatants remained in the evacuation queue, but the transport capacity was limited. At the current rate, it would take 6 more days to complete the evacuation. The Kethemori would reach Firebase Alpha in 18 hours. Zenth positioned his observation equipment to monitor the Firebase closely. This would likely be the final engagement of the campaign, and he wanted detailed recordings of how humans behaved when facing certain defeat. Based on his observations of other species, he expected to see surrender negotiations beginning soon. Instead, Major Coleman gathered his remaining 847 soldiers for what humans called a briefing. The Major stood before his troops in the Firebase's central courtyard, his uniform dirty and his face showing the strain of weeks of constant combat. The soldiers arranged themselves in neat formations despite the desperate circumstances. "I'm going to be honest with you," Coleman began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled troops. "Intelligence reports indicate that enemy forces will reach our position tomorrow morning. They outnumber us 40 to 1. Our supply situation is critical. Reinforcements are not available. Evacuation is not possible." Zenth expected to see fear, panic, or despair in the human soldiers. Instead, he observed something remarkable. They stood straighter, focused more intently on their commander, and showed physiological signs of increased determination rather than decreased morale. Coleman continued his assessment. "The enemy will offer surrender terms. They always do. Those terms will include the immediate cessation of civilian evacuations and the processing of all remaining non-combatants as prisoners of war. Intelligence suggests this processing will not be pleasant." A young soldier, barely past adolescence, raised his hand. "Sir, what are our orders?" "Our orders are simple, Private Taylor. We hold this position until every civilian transport has cleared the system. We buy 6 days with 18 hours of fighting. We make every minute count, every shot matter, and every sacrifice meaningful." Another soldier spoke up. "Major, what are our chances of survival?" Coleman's answer was direct and honest. "Statistically insignificant. We're not fighting to survive, son. We're fighting so that 50,000 people who can't fight for themselves will get to live free. We're fighting so that the children on those transports will grow up on worlds where humans determine their own destiny." Zenth observed the reaction of the troops to this brutally honest assessment. Logic suggested that learning about certain death would cause unit cohesion to collapse. Instead, the opposite occurred. The soldiers began showing increased solidarity, checking each other's equipment, sharing personal items, and expressing what appeared to be satisfaction with their situation. Lieutenant Ben Taylor, the young soldier, who had asked about orders, approached several of his comrades. "Anyone want to write letters home? I've got extra paper, and I promise to make sure they get delivered." The response was immediate. Soldiers throughout the firebase began writing final messages to their families. Zenth monitored several of these communications and found them deeply disturbing. Rather than expressing fear or regret, the messages contained expressions of love, pride, and determination. One message, written by Sergeant Mike Foster, read, "Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I want you to know that I died doing the most important thing I've ever done. We saved 50,000 people today. We made sure that freedom has a future in this galaxy. I couldn't ask for a better way to spend my life." Private Linda Garcia wrote to her sister, "Take care of my kids and tell them their mom was exactly where she needed to be. Some things are worth dying for, and protecting innocent people is at the top of that list. Don't be sad for me. Be proud. I know I am." Zenth found these messages incomprehensible. The humans were not just accepting death, they were embracing it as meaningful and necessary. They had transformed their final battle from a military defeat into a moral victory. Nurse Sandra Price established a field hospital in the firebase's center and refused all suggestions that she evacuate with the medical transports. "These soldiers are going to need medical attention," she explained to anyone who asked. "That's my job, and I'm staying to do it." Price's decision influenced others. Technical specialists who could have left with the support staff chose to remain and maintain the firebase's defensive systems. Communications personnel stayed to coordinate the defense. Even the base chaplain, Father Michael Davis, remained to provide spiritual support to the troops. The most remarkable aspect of the human preparation was their attitude toward the approaching battle. Instead of the grim acceptance Zenth expected, they showed what could only be described as anticipation. They were looking forward to the fight not because they expected to win, but because they believed their sacrifice would accomplish something important. As night fell, the soldiers made their final preparations. They cleaned their weapons, checked their ammunition, and positioned themselves in defensive positions that had been carefully planned to maximize the cost of enemy victory. Each soldier knew their assignment and understood that they would likely die at their post. Private Taylor, who had been promoted to lieutenant when his squad leader was killed, found himself in command of the firebase's outer perimeter. At 19 years old, he was responsible for the lives of 37 soldiers and the defense of the most critical approach to the base. "Sir," one of his soldiers asked, "are you scared?" Taylor's response surprised Zenth with its honesty and maturity. "Terrified," the young officer admitted, "but not of dying. I'm scared of letting down the people counting on us. I'm scared of not doing enough, but mostly I'm scared that 50,000 people might not make it to safety because we weren't." "Good enough." The soldier nodded, understanding. "What do we do about being scared? We do our jobs anyway. Fear means we understand what's at stake. Understanding what's at stake means we'll fight harder than the enemy expects." As dawn approached, Zenth detected the approaching Kethmori forces. The enemy had brought their most experienced troops and heaviest equipment for this final assault. Their plan was simple: overwhelm the human position with such massive firepower that resistance would collapse within the first hour. The attack began with an artillery barrage that should have destroyed most of the firebase's defensive positions. Human installations were targeted with precision-guided munitions, and the base's outer perimeter was subjected to continuous bombardment for 30 minutes. When the bombardment ended, the Kethmori ground forces advanced, expecting to find broken defenses and demoralized survivors. Instead, they encountered something that challenged every assumption they had made about human warfare. The humans had not only survived the bombardment, they had used the time to redistribute their forces and prepare for the ground assault. As the enemy troops moved forward, they were met with coordinated defensive fire from positions that should have been destroyed. Lieutenant Taylor's voice came over the communication channels, calm and professional, despite the chaos around him. "All positions, this is Perimeter Command. Enemy contact confirmed. Rules of engagement are simple. Make every shot count, help your buddy, and remember that every minute we hold is another transport full of families reaching safety." The battle that followed defied every principle of military science that Zenth understood. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting from positions that were being systematically destroyed around them. Yet they continued to fight with increasing ferocity as their situation became more hopeless. When Private Garcia's machine gun position was overrun, she fixed her bayonet and charged the enemy soldiers who had broken through the perimeter. When Sergeant Foster ran out of ammunition, he used his entrenching tool as a weapon and continued fighting until enemy reinforcements overwhelmed his position. When Lieutenant Taylor's communications equipment was destroyed, he ran from position to position under enemy fire, coordinating the defense through hand signals and shouted orders. The most disturbing moment for Zenth came when he intercepted personal communications between human soldiers during the battle. He expected to hear panic, despair, or pleas for help. Instead, he heard something that challenged his understanding of rational behavior. "Garcia, this is Foster. My position is being overrun. Tell my family I love them and I'm proud to serve with people like you." "Foster, this is Garcia. Right back at you, brother. See you on the other side." These humans were not just accepting death. They were finding meaning in it. They had transformed their final battle into an expression of their deepest values. And that transformation was giving them strength that Zenth could not quantify or explain. The journey back to Galactic Council space took 15 days. During this time, Zenth struggled with something he had never experienced before: the complete inadequacy of his analytical framework to explain what he had witnessed. His instruments had recorded everything perfectly. His data was comprehensive and accurate, yet he found himself unable to write the report that had been requested. The 23 human survivors aboard his ship recovered slowly from their injuries. Zenth observed them carefully, trying to understand how they processed their experiences. Logic suggested they should be suffering from severe psychological trauma. They had witnessed the death of their comrades, faced certain death themselves, and survived only through chance. Instead, they showed a remarkable form of psychological resilience. They grieved for their fallen friends, but they also expressed pride in what had been accomplished. They spoke of their dead comrades not as victims of war, but as heroes who had achieved something meaningful through their sacrifice. Nurse Sandra Price, despite her own injuries, continued providing medical care to her fellow survivors. When Zenth asked her why she maintained her duties even though the battle was over, her answer was simple: "Taking care of people is who I am, not just what I do." Corporal Tony Martinez, one of Lieutenant Taylor's soldiers, spent hours writing detailed accounts of his fallen comrades' actions during the final battle. "Someone needs to remember what they did," he explained. "Someone needs to tell their families that they died for something important." Private Lisa Chen, the youngest survivor at 18 years old, asked Zenth about his species and the Galactic Council. Her questions were not about military matters or political relationships, but about families, cultures, and what different species valued most. Even after experiencing the worst of warfare, she remained curious about other forms of life and other ways of living. These conversations forced Zenth to confront fundamental questions about his own species and culture. The Veltar had achieved interstellar civilization through logic, efficiency, and careful calculation of risks and benefits. They had never developed concepts like honor, sacrifice, or dying for abstract principles. Their society was stable, peaceful, and prosperous, but watching the humans made Zenth wonder if something essential was missing. On the 8th day of the journey, Private Chen asked him a question that crystallized his growing uncertainty. Observer, Zenth, what would your people die for? The question should have been easy to answer. Every species had survival instincts and would fight when threatened. But Chen was asking about something different. What values or principles were so important that death was preferable to their loss? Zenth realized he could not answer her question. His people would fight to defend their territory, their resources, or their lives, but they had never developed the concept of fighting for ideals that transcended individual survival. The closest equivalent in Veltar culture was the preservation of their civilization, but even that was ultimately about collective survival rather than abstract principles. We fight to preserve our way of life, he finally answered. Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's what we do too. But I think we might define way of life differently. For us, it's not just about staying alive. It's about staying human. Her explanation forced Zenth to examine the human concept of identity. For the Veltar, identity was primarily biological and cultural. They were Veltar because of their species characteristics and their shared civilization. For humans, identity seemed to be defined by values, choices, and moral commitments that could transcend biological survival. The humans at Firebase Alpha had chosen death rather than compromise their identity as protectors of the innocent. They had valued their humanity more than their human lives, and this distinction was something Zenth had never encountered before. As they approached Council space, Zenth attempted to write his report multiple times. Each draft seemed inadequate to convey what he had observed. Traditional military assessments focused on technology, tactics, and quantifiable capabilities. The human's greatest strength could not be measured by conventional metrics. He tried describing their emotional investment in warfare, but his words sounded like criticism rather than analysis. He attempted to explain their willingness to sacrifice themselves, but it read like evidence of flawed decision-making rather than military effectiveness. Every approach he took failed to capture the essential truth. The humans had redefined warfare itself. 3 days before reaching Council headquarters, Zenth made a decision that violated every protocol of his profession. Instead of writing an objective military assessment, he would submit a personal testimony about what he had witnessed and learned. His final report began, "I was sent to observe humans fight. I expected to document standard military capabilities and provide tactical assessments for potential future conflicts. Instead, I witnessed something that challenges our fundamental understanding of warfare, sacrifice, and what it means to be truly alive." Zenth described the battles in detail, focusing not just on tactics and outcomes, but on the motivations and values that drove human actions. He explained how their emotional investment in protecting others had made them more effective, rather than less effective in combat. He documented their willingness to accept certain death in exchange for meaningful accomplishments. Most importantly, he tried to convey the transformation he had witnessed in himself. These humans taught me that there are different kinds of strength, different definitions of victory, and different reasons for fighting. They showed me that what we consider weaknesses, emotional attachment, irrational loyalty, willingness to sacrifice for abstract principles, can become sources of power that transcend any technological or numerical advantage. The report concluded, with a recommendation that shocked even Zenth as he wrote it. Humanity should not be considered for standard alliance protocols. They are too dangerous to be enemies and too valuable to be anything less than full partners. Any species capable of the warfare I witnessed must be treated with the highest respect and offered the strongest possible alliance terms. When Zenth arrived at Council headquarters, he delivered the human survivors to medical facilities and submitted his report to the Military Assessment Division. The response was immediate and unprecedented. Within hours, emergency sessions were called at the highest levels of Council leadership. The report was analyzed, debated, and ultimately accepted as accurate. The implications were staggering. If humans could achieve such results when fighting with primitive equipment and limited numbers, what would they be capable of with advanced technology and full military support? More importantly, Zenth's descriptions of human sacrifice and determination had created something approaching fear among council members. The idea of facing an enemy that became more dangerous as they approached defeat was contrary to every military doctrine in galactic civilization. The Council's final decision was unanimous. Humanity would be offered immediate full alliance status with complete access to galactic technology and military cooperation. This offer was not extended as charity or goodwill, but as acknowledgement that humans represented the most formidable potential military force the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months later, when the Kethmori Horde attempted to resume their expansion into human territory, they found themselves facing not just human forces, but a coalition of 12 galactic species led by human commanders. The war that followed lasted only 3 weeks and ended with the complete surrender of the Kethmori military. The final battle was commanded by Admiral Kate Morrison, who had survived the original conflict at Tau Ceti. Her strategy was simple: surround the enemy fleet and offer them the same choice the humans had been given: surrender or face complete destruction. The Kethmori, having learned about human warfare from previous encounters, chose surrender. Zenth was present as an observer for this final engagement. He watched as Admiral Morrison accepted the enemy's surrender with the same professionalism she had shown in defending her colonies. There was no cruelty, no revenge, and no humiliation of the defeated enemy. The humans had won completely, but they had won in a way that preserved their identity as protectors rather than conquerors. In his final personal log entry, Zenth wrote, "I regret ever going to observe humans fight, not because of what I witnessed, but because of what I learned about my own species in comparison. We have survived for millennia by avoiding unnecessary risks and minimizing potential losses. The humans have shown me that there are things worth risking everything to preserve, and that the willingness to make such risks can become the foundation of strength that makes risk unnecessary. I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand what I learned from watching humans fight, that true strength comes not from the ability to survive, but from the willingness to sacrifice survival for something greater than oneself. They taught me the difference between existing and living, between self-preservation and self-transcendence. Years later, when other species faced extinction-level threats from forces beyond the galaxy, they did not call for the most advanced weapons or the largest fleets. They called for human advisors and human volunteers. And the humans, true to their nature, always answered.